Kat sat alone on her couch, shoveling popcorn into her mouth. She stared at her TV, tied to the suspense of the movie. The sky darkened as the sun approached the horizon. Hidden behind the ocean of trees her house lay among. One lone tree stood in the center of her yard, visible through the living room window. A menacing presence filled the air, yet to make itself known. Kat was glued to her movie, but still able to catch a glimpse of the black object aimed at her door. Thud! Kat jumped, startled by unexpected disturbance, spilling the popcorn all over the floor. "What the hell?" she whimpered, approaching the door. The doorknob was cold in her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest. The hinges squeaked as the door creaked open. A rush of cold air washed Kat's face as her eyes scanned the dim yard. Nothing could be seen. Nothing made a sound. She slowly shut the door, then cleaned up the popcorn. She had just sat down when another black object hit her door with a louder thud than before. She looked at the tree in the yard, almost certain she saw what threw it. Kat sat there watching the tree, waiting for something to happen. It's just some kids, she thought. Nothing to worry about. She quickly made herself comfortable and began to turn on another movie. Minutes passed, and another thud shattered the silence, shaking the door. Kat raced for the lock and quickly shut the blinds. "They'll go away," she said, but grabbed a knife to calm her nerves and give her a sense of security. Tap, tap, tap. She heard light pecking on the living room window. The pecking grew louder, faster. She froze there in place, staring at the windows as the tapping became more profound. She was afraid to investigate, but brave enough to stand her ground. Her home was small, and every hiding place would be too predictable. Besides, she didn't want to hide. She wanted to see it coming instead of cowering in fear. The tapping suddenly stopped. Kat slowly made her way to the door and put her back to it. A shadow eclipsed the light from the window atop the door. She stood just out of sight, holding her breath. With her back pressed against the wood, she could feel it knocking 3 times softly. Kat could hear the galloping beat of her heart in her head. Her anxiety raised to the peak. 3 more knocks hit the door, harder this time. "Let me in." A hoarse whisper slipped through the door and into Kat's ears. She bit her lip, tears filling her eyes. Another 3 knocks erupted, furious now. "Let me in," a now angry voice ordered. The knocking didn't cease. It grew harder as the voice grew louder. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The knocking grew so fierce it could have shattered the door. Tears leaked from her eyes. "What do I do?" she thought. "Should I open the door?" The knocking was more than she could bear. "I know you're in there, Kat," it said. Her stomach twisted, her breath caught in her throat, and tears now streaming down her face. "Go away," she shouted finally. "Let me in," it screamed in response. "Leave me alone," she cried. The voice and the knocking echoed in her head, making her more nauseous than before. Reaching for the lock hesitantly, she sucked up her tears and held her breath, unlocking the door and throwing it open. Nothing was there. The tree stood in the yard, unmoving. No wind. Nothing. She shut the door, shaking in fear. With the click of the lock, the room grew cold. Goosebumps covered her skin. "Thank you for letting me in," a voice whispered behind her. In 1984, there lived an old widowed lady by herself in a 2-story house, who was completely immobile and bound to her wheelchair. Ever since the mysterious death of her husband, she required the aid of a carer who would visit her on a daily basis to help her with everyday tasks. What made it even more difficult was the fact that the 2 floors of the house were only connected by an old staircase inside. When the old lady needed to move between the two, the carer would have to carry her frail body like an infant up and down the stairs. One day the police received a call from the widow. There had been a murder. Since police units were scarce at the time and the murderer had already fled the scene, only one detective was sent out to conduct the initial crime scene report. He arrived to see the carer's body splayed out on the floor with her vocal cords ripped out in a pool of blood on the first level of the house, with the old lady atop the staircase in her wheelchair watching him, still and silently, seemingly in shock. He could immediately rule her out as a suspect due to the inability to move up and down the stairs, and because she was trapped up there at the time the murder took place. It was similar to the death of her husband many years ago, who had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs. The detective put on his gloves, took photos, swabbed for evidence, and covered the body until the coroner arrived later. All routine business. He scoped the house downstairs for any clues, then asked the old lady if he could look upstairs. She insisted that she was upstairs the whole time and no one apart from her had been up there that day. But regardless of this, the detective ascended the staircase, to which she hesitantly moved aside. Beyond the staircase, there was a narrow corridor with 3 closed doors along it. He checked behind each of the doors. The empty bedroom, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. He became anxious as he slowly made his way to the final bedroom where the old lady slept. He opened it, and everything looked normal. A bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table with a lamp. He checked every wall of the room in horror, as it was not what he discovered, but it was what he didn't discover that made him stop dead in his tracks and slowly reach for his gun in his holster. It was a detail so minor that they had completely overlooked it on the last investigation of the husband's death. There was no phone upstairs. He suddenly heard a noise as he withdrew his gun and rushed out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair atop the stairs. It has been 6 weeks since my first sighting of the wicked Old Hag. I woke up in the middle of the night and went to roll over, but my entire body was paralyzed. I lay there, scared and helpless, contemplating my predicament, when I became aware of a presence in the room with me. A presence that I can only describe as pure evil. I caught sight of a withered old woman at the foot of the bed. Her tall, hunched frame was draped in a long, dirty gown, and wisps of filthy white hair hung from her balding scalp. I channeled all my energy into desperate attempts to move, but my efforts were in vain. It felt as though I was being pinned to the bed by an invisible force. I tried to scream out for help, but my words came out as jumbled whimpers. I could feel her claw-like hands on my legs and my arms as she crawled her way up my rigid body. A crooked smile revealed rotten teeth, and her bloodshot eyes were callous and calculating as she stared directly at me. Suddenly, I bolted upright in bed. I could move again, and the room around me was empty. It was just a bad dream, I concluded. I took a few minutes to catch my breath and settled back to sleep. A couple of weeks later, I met an old friend for a drink, and a point in our conversation reminded me of my dream. I had a scary case of sleep paralysis a couple of weeks ago, I told him. Really? Did you see the old hag? My friend replied. An icy chill ran over my body. I hadn't told anyone about the dream, and there was no way he could have known what I'd seen. How the hell did you know that? I asked with disbelief, my voice quivering. I read about it some time ago, he explained, startled by my reaction. A phenomenon known as Old Hag syndrome, where sufferers of sleep paralysis are visited by an entity, often in the form of an old hag. You're bullshitting me, I said incredulously. He convinced me to look it up, and so when I returned home, I typed the keywords old hag and sleep paralysis into Google. It returned pages full of results, some of which told of ancient folklore spanning different cultures. Others told of personal experiences like my own. To some, the entity took the form of an old lady or a witch. To others, she looked more like a demon. but they all described the presence of an overwhelming evil. Most chilling of all were the accounts in which the hag tortured and molested her victims as they lay paralyzed and helpless. I turned off the computer and tried to put it out of my mind. An eerie mood lingered in the room, and I had a bad feeling that unless I could get her out of my mind, she was sure to pay me another visit. That night, I was woken up by a piercing cackle, and I laid paralyzed as that tall and stooped figure emerged at the foot of my bed. She crawled under the covers and up my body before sitting on my chest and peering down at me. She ran her slimy tongue over her chapped lips and made slurping sounds. What transpired after that I cannot bring myself to talk about. I've spent subsequent days browsing forums for answers, for a way out. I'm neither religious nor superstitious, and I don't believe anything considered supernatural, but scientific resources offer no rational explanation for what I've been experiencing, just speculation and skepticism. In some cultures, it is believed to be a demonic curse, and the entity is brought to life through the power of suggestion. Most victims recall some kind of trigger that worked its way into their subconscious, such as a painting or a friend sharing their personal experience. I've been telling myself, don't think of the old hag, but as we all know, the harder you try not to think of something, the more the thoughts persist. The visions grow more vivid and traumatizing. The more I think of her, some nights she violates me in unspeakable ways, and I wake with bruises, scratches, and bite marks over my body. Other nights I hear her breathing in my ear and find her lying next to me, grinning and gurgling. But I think I've learned a way to be rid of these visions once and for all. I must plant the thought into the mind of someone else and distract the old hag with a fresh victim. As selfish and cruel as I am, to pass this curse on to someone else, I just can't bear it anymore. Dear listener, whoever you are, please forgive me.